I'm Sonal Khullar, the W. Norman Brown Associate Professor of South Asian Studies in the Department of the History of Art at the University of Pennsylvania, and it is a very great honor and pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank Razi Ahmed and the Lahore Literary Festival for the kind invitation to be here, and Rachel Cooper, Dia, Iman, and other colleagues at the Asia Society for making excellent arrangements for the day. And now, on to my task, which is to introduce Professor Iftikhar Dadi, the John H. Burris Professor and Chair of the History of Art and Visual Studies at Cornell University, and a dear friend and colleague. Iftikhar has the unusual distinction of being a practicing artist and leading scholar of transnational approaches to modern and contemporary art, post-colonial theory, and South Asian studies. He's also an accomplished curator, organizer, and institution builder, some of which is evident in his work on the Lahore Biennale as convener of the academic forum and, unofficial cultural ambassador and champion of the project. He is the author of the books Lahore Cinema, which is the topic for our discussion today, and Modernism and the Art of Muslim South Asia, published in 2010. And curator, or rather I should say co-curator and co-editor of important exhibition catalogs, Unpacking Europe, published in 2010, Lines of Control, Partition as a Productive Space, published in 2012, Anwar Jalal Shamza, published in 2015, and Pop South Asia, published in 2022, among other publications. We have collaborated on several projects over the years, most recently, The Next Monsoon, Climate Change and Contemporary Culture Production in South Asia, a multi-year research initiative that he led and which will culminate in an open access publication that I think will be of interest to many of you in the audience, given this afternoon's focus on climate change. Iftikhar has been my editor for an article in the Lahore Biennale Reader, published in 2022, and I was his editor in this volume, Old Stacks, New Leaves, The Arts of the Book in South Asia, also published recently in 2023, a volume that features projects on Pakistan by Iftikhar, Elizabeth Dadi, Naila Mahmood, and the cover, as some of you may have peeked at in the lobby on the flyers, is drawn from the Karkhana Project, a group of 6 artists who studied at the National College of Arts in Lahore, Aisha Khalid, Imran Qureshi, Talha Rathore, Saira Wasim, Nusra Latif, and Hasnat Mahmood. Other Pakistani artists featured in the book are Huma Mulji, Bani Abadi, Sadiq Khan, Chuktai, and that's about all I can remember, but you're going to have to look inside for details. Reviewing Old Stacks for Hyperallergic, critic Nagin Sheikh writes, quote, Khullar's discussion of second-hand book markets in India invoked my memories of book hunting in Karachi's packed fairs and chaotic bazaars, where thorough browsing often resulted in locating out-of-print and limited editions. My favorite find is a gorgeous royal blue linen-bound and richly illustrated copy of the Bible, end quote. Sheikh's response points to a commitment that Iftikhar and I share to thinking within and across national boundaries, especially in South Asia, where we contend with the legacy of what Iftikhar has rightly called in an interview with the artist Naiza Khan, the structural amnesia of partition. The exhibition Lines of Control that he co-curated with Hamad Nasser in 2012 considered the partitions of British South Asia along with those of Ireland, Israel, Palestine, Korea, Germany, Armenia, and Yugoslavia, to name but a few. One of my students wrote in response to reading the catalog, "We aren't living after colonialism. We're talking about colonialism as ever present, and the effects of it are still very much alive. So are the effects of partition. It is not simply that this event, the partition, occurred, but rather the long-lasting effects are still in play." Another student wrote, "By approaching history at an angle, contemporary art keeps us from discerning a meaning, and as a result, excluding certain interpretive communities from the Rememorial Project. The result is a memory of partition that is not structured by partitions, but by a certain generosity, the gift of aesthetics as openness. And I didn't alter a single word. This is what my students have written. Lahore Cinema exemplifies that generosity, the gift of aesthetics as openness, as it turns our attention to persons, stories, and cultural artifacts in South Asia that reckon with empires, nations, and partitions. Through the lens of cinema, this book explores the possibilities and limits of the nation-state, tracing the aesthetic and political reverberations of partition, for example, in a powerful and moving chapter on Jago Hua Savera, A New Day Dawns of 1959, a film directed by A.J. Kardar with a screenplay by Faiz Ahmed Faiz. Lahore Cinema joins a series of new books on South Asian cinema that look beyond Bombay cinema and Bollywood, such as Lota Huq's Cut Pieces, Celluloid Obscenity and Popular Cinema in Bangladesh, published in 2013, Rochna Mazumdar's Art Cinema and India's Forgotten Futures, published in 2021, and Darshana Mini's forthcoming Rated A, Soft Porn Cinema and Mediations of Desire in India, which will be published this autumn by the University of California Press. These books consider art house or B and C circuit films, not Shah Rukh Khan blockbusters. Going well beyond Bombay and studies of plot and narrative that have dominated scholarship on South Asian cinema, Iftikhar's book considers form, circulation, and production, and brings to life real and imagined characters such as Nilo, Ejaz, Dino, Sayeda, and Hamida from a film, Badnaam, Disgraced, of 1966, directed by Iqbal Shehzad with a screenplay by Saadat Hassan Manto. Lahore Cinema resonates with new books on the role of literature, cinema, and media across borders, such as Aisha Jalal's The Pity of Partition, Manto's Life, Times, and Work Across the India-Pakistan Divide, published in 2013, Salma Siddique's Evacuee Cinema, Bombay and Lahore in Partition Transit, published in 2022, and Isabel Huacuja Alonso's Radio for the Millions, Hindi-Urdu Broadcasting Across Borders, published in 2023. Viewing the long partition, to use historian Bazira Zamindar's phrase, viewing the long partition as process rather than event, these books challenge silence, rupture, and forgetting around our collective pasts and allow us to imagine alternative futures, despite, indeed because, of hardening borders and lost life worlds, to quote Iftikhar, writing on his mother, the artist Zarina Hashmi, and the writer Kurtalain Haider. Given contemporary political and social conditions in South Asia, their relentless acts of memory, to use literary scholar Emily Greenwood's phrase, are necessary and urgent. I am deeply grateful to Iftikhar for many gifts: the gift of memory, the gift of aesthetics, the gift of openness, and to the Lahore Literary Festival for providing an opportunity to discuss his important work. Iftikhar.
Thank you, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Razi and Rachel, for organizing this event. And thank you, Sonal, for such a generous and extended and thoughtful introduction. I wanted to talk about a book that I published recently, which is this book called. Before I begin, this is the book that Sonal Khullar has edited, which is available for sale in the store upstairs, which has actually, as she mentioned, a lot of relevance for Pakistan as well, content as well as kind of the broader relevance. So please check it out. And this is the book that I published in late 2022, and there is an open access edition also available. And I'm also trying to work on an Urdu translation to be published in Pakistan, which is going slowly, but I hope it will come to fruition. So the chapters in the book are, these are the chapters. The introduction talks about, basically lays out the historical and the kind of aesthetic challenges that the book tries to tackle. And then there are 4 chapters. And I'll be talking about the parts in red only, okay, today, which is the introduction, the second, and the third chapters. Now, for the introduction, one of among the topics that the introduction deals with is the relationship between Lahore and Bombay cinema before the mid-50s. And then the concept of the long 60s, which I kind of, define as falling between around 1956 to about 1969. The importance of the film song during the cinema of the 40s and the 50s. And the long 60s, as you can see, coincides pretty well with the Ayub Khan era, so the kind of the cultural politics of the Ayub Khan era. And again, the kind of the ongoing relationship between Bombay and Lahore cinema even after the partition, right? That's a very important thing to think about, which is also reflected in this concept called the Lahore effect, which I'll talk about in a bit. And finally, I talk about the problem of memory, right? So the problem of memory in terms of the absence of an official archive for Pakistani cinema, but also a parallel amnesia about this period that I'm writing about, the 50s, 60s, among the younger generations of Pakistanis, right? So it's very curious that if you ask young people today, they may know the films of, let's say, Raj Kapoor or Guru Dutt, or the Amitabh Bachchan, kind of angry young man films. But if you ask them about similar films made in Pakistan, they will not have any idea. This includes, people even living in Pakistan. So many of the films I wrote about have been written about critically for the first time, right? Okay, now what is the long 60s? So if you look at, so the gray bar is my period of the long 60s, which is, as you can see, that cinema production really ramps up, okay, from between 1956 and 1969. And it ramps up not just in Urdu, but in several languages, of which the most important are, after Urdu, is Punjabi and Bengali, okay? And a part of the film industry also included not just the films, but a whole kind of, ensemble of other materials like lobby cards, trade publications, journals, posters, etc. And Eastern Film was an important periodical that was published for several years from Karachi. And this is Ratan Kumar and Nilo in Embrace, and they are both characters whom I discuss in the book as well, in the films. And one of the things we need to think about specifically in relation to Lahore is the power of the Anarkali myth, right? So Anarkali is, the story set in basically, the 17th century of the dancing girl who fell in love with Prince Salim, okay, or the later Emperor Jahangir. And it was written up as a play in 1922 by Imtiaz Ali Taj, and then it was made into cinema repeatedly in actually several languages, okay? In both, in India in several actually languages, but also in Pakistan, obviously. Now, the problem of Anarkali is a very interesting one because, in other words, if I ask the question who's buried in Anarkali's tomb, okay, this has a very interesting answer, okay, because as those of you who've been to Lahore know that there is a tomb of Anarkali which is pictured on the corner in the below right. There is a sarcophagus in the tomb, but there is no name on the sarcophagus, right? And rather, the tomb today functions as an archive, as a historical archive, which actually has, the mutiny, 1857 mutiny papers. It has the Bhagat Singh papers, etc. Right? So there's a way in which this kind of a myth and imagination and history is also conflated with kind of, let's say, revolutionary history, right? So that's one of the ways in which we think about the Lahore effect is the inability to disentangle the kind of, let's say, the facts of history or the revolutionary history from kind of myth making or romance, right? And to really see them in a productive relationship, right? So. Who is buried in Anarkali's tomb is not an answerable question if you ask factually, but one would say what is buried in Anarkali's tomb is a certain relationship between between aesthetics and society, okay, or between history and romance, okay, that is kind of seen as inextricable. Okay, now let me begin talking about, I'll first talk about chapter 3, and then I'll go back and talk about chapter 2. So the chapter 3 looks at two filmmakers, and actually not just the two of them, but actually their kind of larger ecology of filmmaking, right? So they were actually, of course, not working alone, but working with many other kind of, let's say, personnel in the industry. And the film I'm going to talk about is this film called Badnaam, or Disgraced, which is directed by Iqbal Shehzad, story by Manto, dialogues and screenplay are by Riyaz Shahid, and the poets are, they're important kind of poets and actors and other people involved with it. So Khalil Qaisar and Riyaz Shahid have been seen as forming a team with commitments to revolutionary or leftist filmmaking. So the film was, for this film, Riyaz Shahid developed the screenplay and dialogue based on Manto's story called Jhumke, and it examines the nexus between class and sexual exploitation. The story is, Iqbal Shehzad was earlier associated with Eastern Film Studios in Karachi, and this was his first directorial debut. Now, it adheres fairly closely to Manto's story. And the story goes as follows. Dino is a poor man who owns a tonga or a horse carriage. And let me actually go back to the poster. And so this is the poster for Badnaam, and you can see that it evokes a cosmos, right, with kind of stars and planets and so on. But within those, you also see these like jewelry, okay, that is floating into space. So the relationship of the film will be between the miniature and the gigantic, right, or between the local and the universal, if you will, right, or between a sense of locality of small lives, but also about geopolitics, right. So there's a kind of a relationship that the film maps. Okay, so Dino is a poor man who owns a tonga and works long hours to provide for his young wife Hamida and his young daughter Saida. Their home is quite spare, but next to a small mirror on hangs a page from a magazine from an advertisement for Pond's Cream, which shows a woman adorned in jhumke, or in bell-shaped pendant earrings. Okay. Now, Hamida really wants jhumke of her own, which she doesn't have. Dino visits a jeweler who shows him a design that will cost a certain amount of money. And he's saving money. After 20 days, he received a reward for 50 rupees for being honest, the precise sum he needs to buy the jhumke. He decides that he'll present the jhumke to Hamida that very night. Fortunately, the jeweler is awake and at his shop late in the evening. Dino arrives at the jeweler in a framing shot against a shallow background space consisting of a poster from the film Shaheed. So you see Dino in the foreground, but behind him you see a poster of an earlier film by Riyaz Shahid and Khalil Qaisar, which is called Shaheed, right? And it's the same actor. So in other words, Alauddin is the actor playing in both roles. On that poster is the oversized portrait of the same actor, who, on which the text Riyaz Shahid is visible, creating an inter-filmic reference to Dino himself and to the anti-colonial films of Khalil Qaisar and Riyaz Shahid. Above the home of Dino and Hamida lives their landlord. He seemingly acts in a respectable but is a character with unknown background and somewhat dubious motivations. Okay. On the night when Dino leaves home to get the jhumke from the jeweler, Saida, the young daughter, develops a fever. Hamida goes upstairs to ask the landlord to fetch her some medicine, but he seems to be asleep. There's a lavish spread of jewelry that tempts her to possess the earrings she has wanted all along. She picks up the earring and models them, but to her horror, the landlord has awoken. He offers her a poisoned choice. Either she makes herself available to him right then and there, in which she can keep the jhumke, and what transpires between them that night will remain a secret, or he reports the attempted theft to the police, which would ruin her reputation and that of Dino's as well. Hamida, in shock, is now like an automaton who gives in to the landlord's As she's leaving his home in stupor, the landlord puts the jhumke on her ears as payment. Meanwhile, Dino is back with his newly purchased jhumke. He's preparing to gift her the jhumke right away. Hamida stumbles down the outside stairs and enters the home, disheveled in a state of shock. And now I'm going to play you the clip, which is actually became a very kind of famous or notorious clip in this film. Okay. So Dino attempts to brings the newly purchased jhumke to put on Hamida, but is shocked to discover that the landlord's jhumke are already on her ears. Okay. So a very characteristically Manto kind of, the dialogue has become something of a cult classic in Pakistani cinema, or a paisa wasool, according to some observers, or money well spent. According to observers, audiences would repeatedly return to see Badnaam just to see and hear this dialogue. So how do we understand, the popularity of this dialogue, right? So popular forms manage or repress the repercussions of societal anxieties, right? And according to Fred Jameson, and I quote him, gratifying intolerable, unrealizable properly imperishable desires only to the degree that they can be again laid to rest. Badnaam in general, and this dialogue in particular, raises disturbing questions about the all too proximate relation between legal marriage and prostitution, if both relationships are ultimately based on a transactional foundation, exemplified here by the exchange of the jhumke. Okay. At this point, the second half of the film begins when Dino picks up his daughter Saida and they leave the house forever, right? Okay. So the second part of the film, in which you have Dino and Saida, they move to a smaller home, and he begins working very long hours to provide for her education. Years pass, and Saida, played by Nilo, which you see here in the clip here, in the frame here, comes of age as a graceful and accomplished young woman who joins an elite college where mostly the rich study. Here she meets Saeed, a young man also from a poor family who's initially a social misfit and keeps getting heckled by his classmates. Saeed and Saida begin to fall in love, and Saeed gifts her a pair of jhumke one day as a token of his love for her. When Dino sees Saida with the jhumke, he imagines that his worst fears are coming to realization and that Saida is falling prey to the same desire that led Hamida astray. Eventually, however, Saida is able to convince Dino that the gift she received was sincere. Dino brings Saida to the college every day in his tonga. He has made her promise not to reveal that he is her father, as he doesn't want her classmates to find out about their poverty. However, one of the heckling students asks Dino to make Saida available to him. In anger, Dino brings him to a lonely spot and gives him a thrashing. Saeed also comes under the mistaken impression that Dino, the tonga driver, is an unscrupulous, like a pimp, basically. He confronts Dino verbally and physically. Only then does Saida confess to her college mates that Dino is indeed her father. Dino also realizes that Saeed is a young man of character, blesses their love, and suggests that they marry right away. Okay. Now, Badnaam is distinctive as a film on several levels. Riaz Shahid's dialogues for the film are considered among the best he ever wrote in their appropriateness, effect, and symbolism. The film's camera work and editing breaks away from the deeply sedimented conventions that characterize the social film of Lahore. And we saw an example of that already in the rack focus, but I'm going to show you another example of a song and dance sequence, which is filmed after Hamida's fall into prostitution at the apartment of the courtesans who perform for the audience. It was also filmed with techniques uncommon in Lahore cinema, such as crane shots, canted and unconventional angles, and montage editing. The sequence evokes a sensorial experience of fragmented theatricality. Dino drives a client to the red light district one night, and the clients ask him to wait downstairs. Dino rests in his carriage on the street as the mujra is performed one floor above at a balcony overlooking the street. The crane shot moves alternatively from showing Dino close up to gliding up one floor to a long shot of the balcony. Inside, Hamida is singing, Hamida has become a fallen woman and is now in the red light district. Hamida is singing the lyrics of the Mujra song, Bade be murawwat hain ye husn wale, okay, and playing the tanpura. So I'll play you that clip, okay. Okay. Note that the meaning of jhumka also includes the a round chandelier, which you see here hanging from the ceilings. Polished, these, okay. So polished mirrors dizzyingly reflect the dancer, and an outside a large rotating chandelier frames her in a short compositions that evoke a world of glittering surface effects. Across these, the lyrics of the song reverberates in sonic waves, performed by the Kaifi singer Suraya Multanikar. The song became immensely popular with a circulation far beyond the film itself. The music director, incidentally, was Debo Bhattacharya, a Bengali who reportedly came to West Pakistan and worked there from the mid-50s to the 70s. Okay. Now, another remarkable song sequence is the song Bahut Beabru Hokar Tere Kuche Se Hum Nikle. We departed from your street in disgrace, performed by the male students in their college hostel who make fun of the student who was beaten up by Dino for insinuating that his daughter was a loose woman. The refrain in this qawwali is taken from a famous ghazal by Ghalib, but symbolism in the ghazal form is multivalent, and here it's a parody that makes fun of the student, but also addresses anti-imperial geopolitics, right? So 3 students dressed as a Victorian gentleman, evidently modeled after Sherlock Holmes to signify the British, a French legionnaire, and an Uncle Sam figure performed by Said, stand near a large wall map of Africa and mock the defeat of the British in the Suez, the withdrawal of France from Algeria, and the retreat of US forces from Korea. Okay. Very interesting that it moves from a qawwali to this British-style skit, so it's musically also quite innovative, okay? Now, Badnaam's world is punctuated with reference to historical and contemporary leftist and anti-colonial struggles. The private universe of the social film is not sealed off from the larger world, even as this world is evoked through melodramatic conventions in cinema. The globality of Badnaam is evoked by circular motifs in the film. That begin at the very opening credits that shows a spinning wheel of the Tonga and an iris wipes as the Tonga moves from one shot to the next. And when Dino is alarmed at Saida's acceptance of the Jhumke, he directs his monologue to a small globe she has been using in her geography studies. The globe serves as a stand-in for society at large, which denigrates the value of labor and instead uses gold and money to manipulate human needs and weaknesses and takes advantages of this dependence for exploitation. So I'm going to play you this clip, which is also a very interesting clip, where he addresses the globe, okay? It's longer, but I cannot show you more than this. Okay, so the sequence is among the most resonant in the film, shot from multiple angles, including extreme close-ups of Dino angrily addressing the globe, and then him facing the camera in a composition in which the globe is recessed in the background, similar to the shots when Dino discovered the Jhumke on Hamida. So there's a similar cinematic kind of language going on between both sequences. Circularity is also present in the rotating chandeliers, which we looked at, and is foregrounded in the vertical shot compositions from the top of the chandeliers. And it is reiterated in the large paper decorative ornament hanging outside Dino's house at Saida's wedding with Hamida fondles during her conversation with Dino. Now, finally, circularity is also generational. Dino is terrified that Saida is traversing the same moral arc that her mother did in their desire for the Jhumke. But one of the things that the film is quote unquote progressive in the sense that it doesn't talk about biological prison, but it talks about how social pressures actually shape human behavior, right? Okay, and I'm going to play you the last clip of this film, which is this Tonga ride, okay, which is also a song. station and actually traverses Lahore in both kind of rich and poor neighborhoods and also new and older neighborhoods, right? So it's a kind of a psychogeography of a kind of a Lahore in modernity and transition, right? And you also have these vignettes that are presented that dissolve into each other, overlaid at times with close-up of his face, the jeweler's face, rotating ornaments that mimic the movement of the Tonga wheel, accompanied by a jaunty background score. So again, it's gold, in a sense, gold and money that kind of, in a sense, animates capitalist urban life. Okay, now I'm going to move to the next film, okay? So now I will go to chapter 2 and look at one film by Khurshid Anwar. So music, writing, and dialogue in the films of Khurshid Anwar weave centrally around the conflict between the East and the West. While this is a stock theme in commercial Indian and Pakistani cinema, Anwar renders this tension distinctive by the role music plays in its invitation to heal the unbearable implications of this divide. In a further twist, the East here harks back to a conception of India before the partition of 1947. Anwar's work is suffused with a melancholic romanticism and offers an implied address that is sharply at variance with the claims of Pakistani nationalism. Post-1947 realities only amplify the psychic damage within the film's sensitive and traumatized characters. Now, during the 1940s and 50s, Khurshid Anwar worked as a music director in Bombay and was then later continued his career in Lahore. Renowned as a peerless music director, he is also considered one of the most sophisticated directors of Pakistani cinema. Born in a prominent and well-off family, he was exposed to music and theater from an early age. His father, a barrister by profession, is reported to have possessed a massive library of books and gramophone records and would have musical performances. Khurshid Anwar attended the government college in Lahore, from where he received a master's degree in philosophy in 1935. After working in Delhi at All India radio station, he moved to Bombay in 1940 to work as a music director. Now, another important thing to keep in mind is that Khurshid Anwar was 17 years old in 1929 when the year of Bhagat Singh's bombing in Delhi and his arrest. Bhagat Singh, for him, was an ideal and a hero. Anwar was arrested. Anwar attended the trials of Bhagat Singh in Lahore, was arrested himself in 1929 for the allegation of making bombs and spreading terror, okay? Because he had joined a kind of a revolutionary group. After being jailed for a few months, he was released and he continued with his education. So there's a way in which this early involvement with revolutionary kind of activities, I would argue, continues to shape his later films, which are actually quite romantic, okay, his later films. But I want to again see the relationship between kind of, let's say, political affiliation and commitment and a commitment to myth-making, to romance, and to other modes. Okay. Anwar repeatedly disassociates himself from Marxism and communism during his college days. So he's very good friends with Faiz, but in a sense he has this playful kind of rivalry with Faiz. He says, well, I know more about Marxism and it never attracted me, okay? Because I did a PhD in philosophy, master's in philosophy. Anwar also understands Bhagat Singh as someone not primarily influenced by communism. Rather, he suggests that Bhagat Singh's ideal was the Irish Republican Army. Okay. Now, given his repudiation of Marxism and his affiliation with Bhagat Singh and his deep interest in bridging the legacy of Hindustani classical music in dialogue with modernity via the film song, Anwar emerges as an exemplary figure among what I call a group called the Lahore Romanticists. Okay? He deploys the social film to mourn the partition and engage with modernity that is endlessly seductive yet dangerously fatal, necessary yet impossible. The song and dance sequence in the 50s serial film has become the most symbolic site for narrative and affective charge. And in his films, he employs many melodramatic conventions such as missed encounters, emotive identifications, genres in terms of Gothic specters, Indic, quote-unquote, primitive myths, and ruined and traumatized lives. Okay. So Ghungat this is the people who made Ghungat, right? So director is Khurshid Anwar, writer and music is also by him. And the poets are Tanveer Fazli and Faiz, and important singers like Noor Jahan in it, okay? Okay. Now, the opening shot of Ghungat, I'll play that, and then we'll talk about it for a minute. It's very long. It's a beautifully shot 7-minute sequence, but I'm only showing you 1 minute here. Okay.
हम दो अजनबी एक होकर अपनी मंजिल की जानिब जा रहे हैं। आपने मेरी लिखी हुई कहानियां पढ़ी तो होंगी। एक दिन मैंने अम्मी से पूछा, मेरी होने वाली दुल्हन कैसी है? तो हंस के बोले, वो जो तेरी कहानी है ना पूर्वन की रानी, बस यूं समझ ले तेरे लिए पूर्वन की रानी ला रही। पूर्वन की रानी, बचपन में मैंने उसे देखा था। एक धुंधली सी तस्वीर, सफेद साड़ी में लिपटी हुई, मोतिये का हार पहने, खुशबू बखेरती धुन में गायब हो जाती। वो मेरी जिंदगी का सबसे बड़ा ख्वाब है, और आज इस वक्त में मैं उसी ख्वाब की ताबीज देखना चाहता हूँ।
Okay. The claustrophobic encounter between two strangers had already been freighted with Shahid's impossible desire to have his bride confirmed to a specter. Shahid, an impractical man half living in a dream world of his childhood that seeps into his fiction writing, is completely disassociated and disconnected from his bride, whose face he has never yet seen. Her mysterious departure, so she basically disappears from the carriage when the train stops. From the train carriage propels the plot forward now to Lahore. Shahid, alone in his study, has retreated in a hermetic inner world of his room where he drinks alcohol, plays the sitar, and indulges in kind of childish activities like collecting dolls, okay? In an effort to break out of this limbo, Shahid's mother informs him that this is the season when timber is being harvested for the family business, and he needs to go to Purban to attend to it. The local residents remember the haunting legend of Usha Rani from before the time of the partition. So I'm going to now show you the next clip. Okay. So now what will happen is that there is an abandoned Hindu temple, which mysteriously the bells ring. And when the bells ring, then Purban, the Rani of Purban appears, okay, as the specter. Okay. So, and first, this villager will narrate the harrowing story of Usha Rani.
कोई 25-30 बरस उधर की बात है। पुजारी की बेटी उषा रानी और श्याम एक दूसरे से प्यार करते थे।
श्याम?
हाँ, श्याम, जो सुंदर नवास में रहता था। उसके वालिद लाहौर के बहुत बड़े रईस थे। वो लोग हर साल गर्मियों में यहाँ आया करते थे।
और फिर
वही कुछ हुआ जो धन वाले किया करते हैं। श्याम के अमीर बाप ने गरीब पुजारी की बेटी को ठुकरा दिया। ऊंचे घर से श्याम के लिए दुल्हन ले आया, पर दुल्हन का चेहरा देखने से पहले ही श्याम ने जहर खाकर अपनी जान दे दी।
जान दे दी?
हाँ, और उसकी मौत के बाद उषा रानी भी झील में कूद कर मर गई। वो दिन और आज का दिन उषा रानी की बेचैन रूह सुंदर नवास के गिर्द भटकती रहती है।
Okay. According to this harrowing story, Usha Rani was the daughter of a temple priest who fell in love with Shyam, the son of a wealthy businessman from Lahore who was visiting from the city. Forbidden by his father to marry into Usha Rani's poor family, Shyam was coercively betrothed to another woman from a more suitable class background, whom he had never seen. In despair, Shyam committed suicide on his wedding night before lifting the veil. Usha Rani also drowned herself in the lake in Purban, but her spirit continues to haunt the valley even today in search of her beloved. Okay, now Ghungat's songs are notable for their diction. Many of them avoid a heavy use of Persianate vocabulary and instead deploy North Indian language registers such as closer to Hindavi, Purbi, and Bhojpuri. So this song is an example. Raho mein thari mein nazrein jamaye, janam janam ki aas lagaye, koi aaye. Right? Shahid becomes more and more enthralled with this spectral figure of Usha Rani. Characteristically, when the abandoned temple bells rings and without anyone present at the temple, they signal that Usha Rani will make her appearance. She meets Shahid among trees, shrouded in foggy and misty aura, a graceful figure moving effortlessly in the forest. Although she points out, and in some cases she appears as this frontal image against vibrating light, reminiscent of a Hindu goddess, right? Okay, and then she also shows him, places where there is that supposedly, right, where that Shyam and Usha Rani had written their declared their love on this tree. It's written in Devanagari, right? And although he is unable to read Hindi or remember his supposed previous incarnation, she urges him to remember his previous incarnation. He is nevertheless more and more infatuated with Usha Rani. The only way for them to be together, she eventually tells him, is for him to bring his wife Nahid, whom he had never seen also in the train carriage, to Purban and to drown her in the lake. After her drowning, Usha Rani's ghost will inhabit Nahid's body, and they will finally be together in this present incarnation, a union they were unable to achieve in their previous life. Okay, so I'll show you the clip of the drowning. Okay.
वो देखो सामने, उस जगह कभी मैं डूब के मरी थी, डूब के मरी थी, डूब के मरी, डूब के मरी। और उस जगह मुझे नहीं किसी और को मरना चाहिए था।
किसको?
तुम्हारी बीवी को, तुम्हारी बीवी को, तुम्हारी बीवी को, तुम्हारी बीवी को।
एक बीवी अपने शौहर के लिए क्या कुछ कर सकती है?
अपनी जान तक दे सकती है।
क्या आप मुझे अपनी जिंदगी दे सकती हैं?
ये जिंदगी आप ही की है।
अगर आप मेरी जिंदगी चाहती हैं तो
हाँ,
आपको इस झील में डूबना होगा।
ऐसा ही है तो मेरी जान हाजिर है। आइए, अपने हाथों से मुझे इस झील में फेंक दीजिए। और जब उसकी लाश झील की तह में पहुंच जाएगी, तो मेरी आत्मा उसके शरीर में चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी, चली जाएगी।
नहीं।
Notice he makes no attempt to save her. Okay, so Shahid follows through with the plan Bent forward with her head covered with her veil and her face still not visible, Nahid follows him to the lake and they ride on a small boat in the misty environment lit by moonlight that evokes an otherworldly Gothic aura. In the boat, Nahid is seated in the same position as she was at the beginning of the film in the train carriage, dressed in the same bridal wear, with the veil covering her head. She gently asks him to throw her overboard with his own hands. Nevertheless, the indecisive Shahid hesitates as conflicting voices are ringing inside his head. Usha Rani's urgings to drown Nahid and his own conscience about becoming a murderer. Nahid falls in the still water unassisted by Shahid. The stunned Shahid rows back to the shore, passing silently by Nahid's veil floating in the lake. The police are waiting on the shore and promptly arrest Shahid for Nahid's murder. Okay, so now this film is also very interesting in genre-wise because there are actually 2 or 3 genres. It has elements of horror films. Okay, it has elements of a Gothic film, but then at the end it turns into a detective story. Okay. So now we are going to look at the denouement. Okay. So So this is the police. So they bring him to this bungalow, where a group is already assembled, which includes Shahid's mother and his nanny, Nahid's father. Shahid is lectured first by the genial police officer. The police chief tells the assembly that Nahid is indeed alive and was with his wife this very morning reading together the famous short story, The Rani of Purban, by the acclaimed writer Shahid. He berates Shahid for not living in the modern era. Okay, so let's look at this clip. Okay.
कौन? शाहिद? शाहिद तो नाहिद को यहाँ हनीमून मनाने लाया था।
हनीमून? खून कहिए खून।
ये गलत है। जिस कश्ती में हम दोनों सवार थे, वो डोलने लगी। नाहिद ने घबराकर खुद ही झील में छलांग लगा दी और डूब गई।
ये नामुमकिन है। मेरी बेटी डूबकर नहीं मर सकती। इसी साल उसे अपने कॉलेज में तैराकी का पहला इनाम मिला था।
कॉलेज के 20 गज चौड़े तालाब में तैर लेना और बात है, लेकिन 2 मील चौड़ी झील को पार कर लेना कोई खेल ना था। थकन से निढाल वो बेचारी किनारे तक पहुंच तो गई, लेकिन पहुंचते ही मर गई होती तो मिस्टर शाहिद इस वक्त जेल की 4 दीवारी में बंद होते।
कहाँ है मेरी नाहिद?
आज सुबह जब मैं अपने घर से निकला तो वो बड़े इत्मीनान से बिस्तर पर लेटी, तकिए से टेक लगाए, मशहूर अफसाना नवीस शाहिद जमाल का शाहकार अफसाना पूर्बन की रानी मजे ले लेकर मेरी बीवी को सुना रही थी। जवाब नहीं आपका। 20वीं सदी में रहते हैं और कहानियां अल्फ लैला के जमाने की लिखते हैं।
Okay. So I want us to think about, what he's saying, which is that you're 20वीं सदी में रहते हैं और कहानियां आप लैला के ज़माने की लिखते हैं. So what really is the time of modernity, of the post-traumatic, time of partition that we are inhabiting, right? Whether it's a time of recursive memories and of kind of redoubling, right? So Anwar's cinema insistently urges its audience to remember a recent past, not defined by the selective amnesia of the nation state in South Asia, and suggests effective potentialities of cultural forms that might heal or at least address colonial modernity's fractures of the self. And he does so this is just one film, but he does so very, I think, importantly in a number of very important films. So let me end here. And I hope we have some time for Q&A.
Thank you, Iftikhar, for a wonderful presentation, which really brought the book to life. I highly recommend it. I'm going to ask a couple of questions that I think we can maybe carry on the discussion. You might be able to answer them here, and then we could carry on the discussion over lunch or outside at the signing. And one is a question that authors are often asked about their work, and it's about the process of research and what you expected to find when you began writing this book and what you uncovered. It seems to me, to use academic language, that the presentation told us a lot about archives, institutions, cinemas where these films might have been screened. I noticed the Shalimar recording from Islamabad about, how the film still survives and how you located the works that you studied. So something about the process of research and archives. And the other is that you're quite unusual, I would say, among art historians of our type to engage very seriously with popular culture, with cinema, with a very wide range of visual culture. I will say for myself, most of my writing is limited to what we would describe as high art that's shown in museums and galleries, not exclusively, but very much in that tradition. But what's to be gained from studying that high art, which you make yourself, which you write about, and the kind of work that we were looking at today?
Thank you, Sonal. Thank you very much. They're both great questions. So the process, the research question is a very long one to answer, but basically it took me about 10 years to research and write this. Because at the beginning, I didn't have much. I didn't have any sense of what are the important films, who are the important directors, okay? Because there is very little published. There's a book by Mushtaq Gazdar, which was published in 1997, which is a very useful survey, but it's a survey, right? And there really isn't any kind of critical or analytical study. So it took me a long time to kind of gather materials. And as I mentioned, there is no official archive. So India has an archive in Pune. Bangladesh has an archive, but Pakistan has no official archive. So even the films themselves, the celluloid, I have not been able to find the celluloid. But in the 1980s, many of these films were either transferred to VHS by Shalimar Recording Company. So if that transfer happened, then somebody will make you a DVD, right? My Ghaffar Bhai in Rainbow Center, my contact, okay, in Karachi, okay? If not, then, now many of them are now, in the last 4 or 5 years, many of them have appeared on YouTube and Vimeo and places like that. But actually, many critical films that were not commercial successes, I cannot find, okay? Because they were not transferred to VHS, and so they're lost. And who knows where the celluloid is. And I think it's a criminal negligence on the part of, let's say, Pakistan, okay, not to take care of its cinematic legacy and its kind of the cinematic archives. Let me just put it shortly like that. Okay, the second question is what is to be gained for studying kind of popular cinema. Now, if you think about cinema of the mid-20th century, mid to later 20th century, arguably it is the art form that had the biggest reach, okay? Because even the music of South Asia in the 20th century, the modern music is primarily film music, right? So in other words, if you want to think about an art form that has the widest reach, okay, that arguably might be cinema, right? And I would say the cinema of this period is also plays a very, I would say, a progressive role, not necessarily consciously, but as you can see in both films, right? They are both, in a sense, giving you visions of, one is about social injustice, kind of, in a sense, thinking about sexuality in relation to commodification in the case of Badnaam. Here, it's very much a partition allegory, right? And it's really making you, think about what it means to be Pakistani, right? So I think, the commercial art, art form in the case of cinema plays arguably the most influential and progressive role in the mid to later 20th century. So hence my interest. That. So there's a question. It's very hard to see. Yeah, that's
You haven't talked about Punjabi cinema because obviously, we don't have time to do it. But I was just wondering, in your research on Punjabi cinema in Lahore, did you find that there was this interesting distinction where all of the actors really are Punjabi, and in the films that were made in Urdu, they were sort of transformed and taken into the UP culture, and so that they behaved much better as actors and in terms of realism when they did the Punjabi film versus the Urdu films. Did you notice that? I did.
No, you see that this question of Punjabi in its relation to Urdu actually has it's a very important question, and it has a very nuanced. I mean, one thing one would say briefly is that if you look at 20th century Punjabi, Urdu literature, it's more than half is written by Punjabis, okay? So that's one thing. Because also in the colonial era, it's Punjab that adopts Urdu as a language of instruction rather than the UP, right? Okay. So it has kind of colonial, but also it has to do with the kind of, let's say, the vexed relationship between Urdu and Punjabi that continues into today. The question of realism, I'm myself not Punjabi, I don't speak Punjabi, so I don't work on Punjabi films. I think they're very important to work on, and it needs really serious study, right? But I would say that where I would perhaps take a different tack from your, what you suggested is that I'm not sure, I'm not necessarily of the point of view that realism, that more realism is a good thing, okay? So in other words, because I think cinema is about fabling, and there are different modalities of fabling, and realism happens to be one of them. So I'm not privileged, realism is not a privileged modality of working from the way I see cinema.
So I'm sorry, we're going to have to cut it here.
I just want to make an interjection of 1 minute, less than 1 minute. And that is to remember the amazing scholar who wrote in Urdu, Yasin Gureja Sahib, and his remarkable book, पाकिस्तान की 100 शाहकार फिल्में, और वो उर्दू में है और पढ़ने के लायक है, and in your words, it's critical as well. I mean, it's, so I just wanted to remember him.
Thank you so much.